I didn't mean it the way it sounds. That's what I need everyone to understand first. I didn't mean it as an insult. I didn't mean it as dismissive or cruel or hurtful. I meant it as realistic, as honest, as acknowledging the reality that most relationships in your 20s are practice, are learning experiences, are stepping stones to your real relationship, are ways to figure out what you want before you find the person you're actually going to end up with. That's just facts. That's just how dating works. That's just how people grow and learn and develop relationship skills. I was being practical, being real, being honest about where we were and what this was. We'd been dating for a year and a half. A year and a half is significant, but it's not forever. It's not marriage. It's not the end goal. It's a phase. It's a stepping stone. It's part of the journey, not the destination. And I thought he understood that. I thought we were on the same page about what this relationship was and where it was going. I thought he knew this was just practice for both of us. I said it to my friend. During brunch, during one of those conversations where you're catching up and discussing your life and being honest about your relationship. Not to him directly, to my friend, in what I thought was a private conversation about my thoughts and feelings and plans for the future. Honestly, I think he's a practice relationship. Like, he's great for now. He's teaching me what I want and don't want. But he's not the one. He's not who I'm going to end up with. He's practice. He's preparation for my real relationship that comes later. And I think that's okay. I think that's healthy. I think acknowledging that some relationships are stepping stones is mature and realistic. My friend looked uncomfortable. Asked if I'd told him that. Asked if he knew I saw our relationship that way. I said no, obviously not. Why would I tell him that and risk hurting his feelings when we're perfectly fine right now? She said I should be honest with him, that it was unfair to be with someone while seeing them as temporary, that he deserved to know if I didn't see a future. I said she was being dramatic, that everyone has practice relationships, that this is just how dating works in your 20s, that I didn't need to have some big serious conversation about it when nothing was wrong. We were fine. Everything was fine. This was just reality. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from, except he was there. At the restaurant. At a table behind us that I hadn't seen when we sat down. He'd come to meet his friend for lunch, had been sitting there the whole time, had heard everything I said, every word, every classification of our relationship as temporary, every acknowledgement that I didn't see a future, every dismissal of what we had as just practice. I didn't know until I got up to leave, walked past his table, made eye contact, saw the expression on his face, not anger, not hurt that I could see, just this calm, measured look that meant he was processing something significant. And I knew immediately that he'd heard. Knew from that look that everything I'd said to my friend had been overheard. Knew that my private assessment of our relationship wasn't private anymore. Hey, I said, trying to act normal, trying to pretend nothing was wrong, trying to salvage this somehow. I didn't know you were here. Funny coincidence. Yeah, he said. His voice was flat, even, giving nothing away. Funny coincidence. Can we talk later? Sure, yeah, of course. I'll text you when I get home. But I knew from his tone that this conversation was going to be bad. Knew from his face that he'd heard everything. Knew from the way his friend was carefully not looking at me that they'd both heard every word I'd said about our relationship being practice. Dawas an Tokyo, one sipon apround tab akon, where's hon shalm. He came over that evening. I'd spent the entire afternoon rehearsing explanations, pacing my apartment, practicing different ways to explain what I'd said, preparing justifications for why practice relationship didn't mean what he thought it meant, planning how to spin my words into something less hurtful, how to explain that calling him practice didn't mean I didn't care, How to make him understand that this was just realistic thinking, not dismissal. How to convince him that everything was fine and he was overreacting to hearing something out of context. How to minimize and deflect and salvage what I knew was probably already destroyed. The knock on my door came at 7. I opened it. He stood there looking exactly like he always did. Jeans, hoodie, that calm expression he always had. Not angry, not visibly hurt, not emotional in any obvious way. Just that measured, controlled look that I was beginning to realize meant he was processing something significant, that he'd made a decision, that this conversation was going to go very differently than I wanted. He walked in, didn't kiss me hello like he normally would, didn't hug me, didn't touch me at all, just walked past me into my living room, sat down on my couch, that couch where we'd watched hundreds of hours of TV together, where we'd had lazy Sunday mornings, where we'd talked about our days, where we'd built what I'd now labeled as practice. He looked at me, waited for me to sit down across from him, that same calm, measured expression, and said simply, without preamble, without easing into it, "So I'm a practice relationship." Not a question, a statement, just repeating what I'd said, confirming what he'd heard, establishing the foundation for whatever conversation was about to happen, making it clear he wasn't confused, wasn't misinterpreting, wasn't here to be convinced he'd heard wrong, he'd heard correctly, and now we were going to address it. That's not... Look, I didn't mean it like it sounded. It came out wrong. I was just being realistic with my friend, just acknowledging that not every relationship leads to marriage. Just being honest about the fact that we're young and still figuring things out. I wasn't being dismissive of you. I wasn't saying you don't matter. I wasn't saying what we have isn't good. I was just being realistic about where we are in life, about what this stage of dating is typically about learning and growing. You said I'm not the one. You said I'm preparation for your real relationship that comes later. You said I'm a stepping stone. You said you're figuring out what you want and don't want through me. Those were your exact words. I heard them clearly. There wasn't any ambiguity. There wasn't any misinterpretation. There wasn't any chance I misheard. You classified our entire relationship as temporary practice for something better that comes later. Every word was calm. Every sentence was measured. No yelling, no raised voice, no dramatics, no emotional outburst, just calm, factual recitation of what I'd said, just clear acknowledgement of what he'd heard, just accurate summary of how I'd characterized us to my friend. Just him making sure I couldn't claim he misunderstood or took things out of context. I was just talking to my friend. I was just being honest about my thoughts and feelings. I was just processing where we are. I didn't mean for you to hear it. I wouldn't have said it if I'd known you were there. It was supposed to be a private conversation where I could be honest about my uncertainties without hurting anyone. So you think it, you just wouldn't say it to me. You see me as temporary practice. You just weren't planning to tell me that. You don't see a future with me. You just weren't going to mention it. You've been with me for a year and a half, 18 months, while seeing me as a stepping stone to something better, and you were just going to keep that assessment to yourself. You were going to keep dating me, keep letting me invest in this, keep letting me think we might have a future, while knowing the entire time that you'd already decided I'm just practice. He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what I'd been doing, exactly what I'd planned to keep doing. I'd been with him for 18 months while privately seeing him as temporary, while not seeing long-term potential, while viewing our relationship as a learning experience rather than the real thing, while knowing I'd eventually move on to what I considered my actual relationship. And I hadn't planned to tell him any of that because why would I? Why hurt his feelings when everything was fine right now? Why have a difficult conversation when the relationship was working for what I needed it to be? Why disrupt something that was serving its purpose just because that purpose was practice? I care about you. You know I care about you. Obviously I care about you. We've been together for a year and a half. That's not nothing. That's significant. Just because I don't see us getting married doesn't mean I don't value what we have right now. Just because I'm not certain you're the one doesn't mean I don't enjoy being with you. Just because I think we're learning from each other doesn't mean what we have isn't real. Can't we have something that's good for now, without the pressure of forever? Can't we enjoy what we have, without putting all this expectation on where it has to go? What we have? You mean the practice relationship? The stepping stone? The preparation for your real relationship later? That's what you value, me being your learning experience. Me being temporary while you figure out what you actually want. Me teaching you lessons you'll use with someone else. Me being the beta test for your actual relationship. That's what you think I should be happy about. That's what you think is good enough? That I'm good enough to date but not good enough to keep. That I'm worth practicing with but not worth a future with. You're twisting what I said. You're making this sound worse than it is. Everyone has relationships that don't lead to marriage. Everyone dates people who aren't the one. Everyone has relationships that are about learning and growing. That's normal. That's just how dating works. That's how people figure out what they want. I don't understand why you're making this into such a catastrophic issue when it's just realistic thinking about how relationships work in your 20s. Because you've been with me for a year and a half while seeing me as practice, while not seeing a future, while knowing you're temporary but not telling me, while planning to move on to something better eventually, but not mentioning that. You've been in a relationship that you've privately classified as temporary without giving me any indication, without letting me know that this has an expiration date in your mind, without allowing me to make an informed decision about whether I want to be someone's practice. That's not normal. That's dishonest. That's not realistic. That's deceptive. That's not how dating works. That's how using someone works. I wasn't using you. Yes, you were. You were using me to learn what you want in a relationship while knowing I'm not it. You were using me to practice relationship skills you'll use with someone else. You were using me as a stepping stone to get to your real relationship. You were getting the benefits of having a boyfriend while knowing I'm temporary. You were letting me invest emotionally and time and energy while knowing you've already determined I'm not worth keeping. That's using someone. That's taking what you need while knowing you'll discard them eventually. That's not a relationship. That's exploitation disguised as dating. The word exploitation stung. Because when he said it like that, that's exactly what I'd been doing. I'd been taking the benefits of having a boyfriend, companionship, affection, support, sex, someone to do things with, while knowing the entire time that he was temporary, while knowing I'd leave eventually, while knowing he was just practice. I'd been getting everything I wanted from the relationship while giving him a relationship that was secretly temporary. That was exploitation. That was using him. That was taking advantage of the fact that he thought we were building something real. I tried to backtrack, desperately, frantically, tried to minimize what I'd said, tried to reframe it, tried to spin it into something less damaging, tried to convince him that practice relationship didn't mean what he clearly understood it to mean, tried to explain that I still cared about him even if I didn't see forever, tried to salvage something, anything, from this conversation that was spiraling completely out of my control. Look, you're taking this too seriously. You're making it into something bigger than it is. I was just venting to my friend. I was just processing my thoughts out loud. Everyone does that. Everyone has doubts. Everyone questions their relationships sometimes. It doesn't mean I don't value what we have. It doesn't mean you don't matter to me. It just means I'm being realistic about the fact that we're young and we're still figuring out our lives, and not every relationship has to be forever for it to be meaningful. He just looked at me. Let me talk. Let me dig myself deeper. Let me show him exactly how little I'd valued what we had. How thoroughly I'd dismissed him. How completely I'd been using him while he thought we were building something real. "You keep saying you're being realistic," he said when I finally stopped. "But realistic would have been telling me you see us as temporary. Realistic would have been being honest about not seeing a future. Realistic would have been giving me the information I needed to decide if I wanted to invest in something you'd already determined was practice. What you did wasn't realistic, it was selfish. You kept me in the dark about how you saw us, so you could keep getting what you wanted from the relationship while knowing you'd leave eventually. I wasn't keeping you in the dark. Yes, you were. For 18 months. You knew you saw me as temporary. You knew you didn't see a future. You knew you were using me to figure out what you wanted. You knew you'd leave eventually. And you kept all of that to yourself. You let me think we might have potential. You let me invest emotionally. You let me plan for a future that you knew didn't exist. That's keeping me in the dark. That's deception. That's lying by omission. Every word was accurate. Every accusation was true. I had kept him in the dark. I had let him think we might have a future. I had let him invest while knowing I wouldn't. I had deceived him through silence, through letting him believe something I knew wasn't true. Look, I said something stupid to my friend. I was being too honest. I was being too blunt. But that doesn't change the fact that I care about you and I'm happy with you right now. Can't we just focus on the present instead of worrying about the future? Can't we just enjoy what we have without putting all this pressure on where it's going? You want to focus on the present because you've already decided there's no future. You want to enjoy what we have because you know it's temporary, and you're fine with that. You want me to stop worrying about where this is going because you've already determined it's not going anywhere. But I didn't know that. I've been in this relationship thinking it might be something real, thinking it might have potential, thinking we were building towards something, and you've been in it knowing it's just practice, knowing it's temporary, knowing you're going to move on eventually. That's not the same relationship. We haven't been in the same relationship this whole time. He was right. We hadn't been in the same relationship. He'd been in a real relationship with potential. I'd been in a practice relationship with an expiration date I'd just never mentioned. We'd been experiencing the same relationship completely differently. And I'd never told him, never gave him the choice about whether he wanted to be someone's practice, never asked if he was okay with being temporary, just decided it unilaterally and kept it to myself. So what do you want me to say? I can't change how I feel. I can't force feelings I don't have. I'm being honest now. Isn't that worth something? Isn't it better to know the truth? The truth that you've been using me as practice? The truth that I'm not good enough to be your real relationship? The truth that you've been with me while actively seeing me as preparation for someone better? That truth? Yeah, that's worth something. It's worth me making a decision. The way he said making a decision made my stomach drop, made me realize this conversation wasn't about clearing the air, wasn't about explaining my perspective, was about him deciding whether to stay or leave, was about consequences I hadn't anticipated when I'd called him practice. What decision? Whether to stay in a relationship where I'm seen as practice, whether to be with someone who's already decided I'm temporary, whether to waste more time on someone who's waiting for something better, and I think the answer is pretty clear. You're breaking up with me over one comment, over me being honest with my friend. That's ridiculous. That's an overreaction. We've been together for 1.5 years and you're just going to throw that away. You threw it away when you decided it was just practice, when you classified me as temporary, when you determined I'm not the one. You threw it away, you just didn't tell me. I'm just making it official. I'm just acknowledging what you've already decided, that this relationship has an expiration date. I'm just moving that expiration date to today instead of whenever you decided you'd practiced enough. So you're being spiteful. You're punishing me for being honest. I'm being self-respecting. I'm choosing not to be someone's practice. I'm deciding that I'd rather be with someone who sees me as real, not temporary. I'd rather be alone than be someone's stepping stone. You made your assessment, I'm practice. So, let me practice something. Let me practice walking away from someone who doesn't value me the way I deserve. He stood up, started gathering his things that were at my apartment, his toothbrush from the bathroom, his phone charger from my nightstand, his hoodie from my closet, the book he'd been reading that was on my coffee table, all the small accumulations of a year and a half together, all the physical evidence of our relationship, all the markers of someone who'd been integrating into my life while I saw them as temporary. I followed him around, panicking now, realizing this was actually happening, realizing he was actually leaving, realizing that calling him practice had consequences I hadn't anticipated. You're really doing this? You're really leaving over this? Can't we talk about it more? Can't we work through this? Relationships have rough patches. This doesn't have to end everything. This isn't a rough patch. This is a fundamental incompatibility. You see me as practice, as temporary, as not good enough for your real relationship. I see myself as deserving someone who thinks I'm enough as I am. Those views aren't compatible. There's nothing to work through. You've made your assessment. I'm accepting it and responding accordingly. He was so calm. Too calm. That scary calm that means someone has made a decision and won't be swayed. That controlled tone that means arguing won't change anything. That measured cadence that means they've thought this through and arrived at a conclusion. I called you practice in a private conversation with my friend. I didn't mean for you to hear it. I wouldn't have said it if I'd known you were there. Can't you give me some grace for that? Can't you understand that people say things privately that they wouldn't say to the person? Yes, I understand that. I understand that you think things about me that you keep hidden, that you've classified our relationship as temporary without telling me, that you see me as a stepping stone while I thought we were building something real. I understand all of that now, and understanding it makes me want to leave, makes me realize I don't want to be with someone who's secretly waiting for something better. Who's using me as practice? Who's decided I'm not the one but is staying anyway? That's not the relationship I want to be in. So what? You need to be with someone who thinks you're perfect, who never has doubts, who's immediately certain you're the one. That's unrealistic. Everyone has uncertainties. Everyone has doubts. Everyone questions whether their current relationship is the right one. I'm just being honest about it instead of pretending I'm certain when I'm not. There's a difference between having doubts and calling someone practice. There's a difference between questioning the relationship and deciding it's temporary. There's a difference between uncertainty and classification as a stepping stone. You didn't express doubts. You declared me practice. You didn't question us. You determined we have an expiration date. That's not uncertainty. That's a verdict. And I'm accepting your verdict. I'm practice. So let me practice leaving. He walked to the door, carrying the small bag of his belongings, not looking back, not hesitating, not giving me an opening to change his mind, just executing the decision he'd made, just practicing the walking away he'd said he'd do. Please don't go. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I care about you. I don't want this to end. Please. He paused at the door, turned to look at me one last time, and said something that broke me more than the leaving did. You don't want this to end because it's convenient for you right now, because it's working for what you need it to be, practice, but you were always going to end it eventually. When you found your real relationship, when someone better came along, when you'd practiced enough, you were always planning to leave me. I'm just doing it first. I'm just choosing when instead of waiting for you to decide you've gotten what you needed from me. And that's called self-respect. That's called not being someone's practice. That's called walking away with dignity instead of waiting to be discarded. Then he opened the door and left, closed it quietly behind him. No slamming, no dramatic exit, just a calm departure, just someone practicing walking away from someone who'd called them practice. Wai chatas kak shao. The first week was terrible. Worse than I expected. I was angry at first. Furious, actually. Convinced he was overreacting to a massive degree. Convinced he was being dramatic and immature. Convinced he was blowing one comment completely out of proportion. Convinced he'd realize within days that he made a huge mistake and come back apologizing for being so sensitive. Convinced that ending a 1.5-year relationship over one overheard comment was ridiculous and proved he wasn't ready for an adult relationship anyway. Convinced that his leaving validated my assessment that he was just practice, because someone ready for a real relationship wouldn't give up this easily. I texted him that first night, after he'd been gone for a few hours, after I'd had time to process that he'd actually left, after I'd convinced myself this was just a dramatic gesture and he'd want to talk once he'd cooled down. Can we please talk about this like adults? You left so quickly we didn't really get to finish the conversation. I understand you're hurt, but walking away doesn't solve anything. We should talk this through. No response. Nothing. Not even the read receipt showing he'd seen it. Just my message sitting there in blue text, unanswered, ignored like I suddenly didn't matter at all. I waited an hour. Texted again. I know you're upset. I get it. But we've been together for 1.5 years. That has to mean something. That has to be worth fighting for. Can we please just talk? Still nothing. Still no response. Still complete silence like he'd blocked me or deleted my number or decided I no longer existed in his life. The next day, I tried a different approach. Apologetic instead of dismissive. Acknowledging hurt instead of minimizing it. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry you heard it that way. It came out wrong. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we please talk so I can explain properly? This time I got a response. Brief, clear, devastating. You said what you meant. I heard it correctly. There's nothing to explain. Please respect my decision and stop contacting me. That text broke something in me. The finality of it. The coldness. The complete absence of affection or softness or any indication that our 1.5 years together had meant anything at all to him. Just boundaries. Just him telling me to leave him alone. Just him making it clear this wasn't a fight or a break. This was over. But I couldn't accept that. Couldn't accept that he was actually done. So I kept texting, kept trying different angles, kept hoping something would get through to him. Day 3. You're being unfair. Everyone has doubts in relationships. Everyone questions whether their current partner is the one. I'm just being honest about that instead of pretending to be certain. Don't you think honesty is important? Isn't it better that I was real with my friend instead of lying to myself? No response. Day 4. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I kept you in the dark, and maybe you're right that I should have told you, but can't we work through this? Can't we figure out how to communicate better? Isn't that what relationships are about? Working through hard things together? No response. Day 5. I miss you. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But doesn't what we had matter? Doesn't a 1.5 years count for something? Don't you miss me at all? No response. Day 6. You're being immature. You're running away instead of dealing with relationship problems like an adult. You're proving that maybe you aren't ready for a serious relationship if you can't handle difficult conversations. Maybe I was right to see you as practice if this is how you handle conflict. That one got a response, not the response I wanted. I'm not running away. I'm choosing not to be with someone who sees me as temporary. I'm choosing not to be someone's practice. I'm choosing not to stay with someone who's already decided I'm not good enough to keep. That's not immaturity, that's self-respect. Please stop texting me. This is my final request. If you contact me again, I'll block you. And that was it. That was the last time he responded. The last communication I got from him. The last acknowledgement that I existed in his life at all. I called my friend, the one who'd been at brunch with me when I'd said it. The one who'd witnessed the beginning of this disaster. Vented about how unreasonable he was being. How he was blowing this out of proportion. How he was ending something good over essentially nothing. How he couldn't handle one moment of honesty. How he was being dramatic and immature. Expected her to agree with me. Expected her to validate that he was wrong, and I was right. Expected her to tell me he'd come around. Expected her to support me the way friends are supposed to support each other. Instead, she said something that made me deeply uncomfortable. Something that suggested maybe she'd been thinking about this all week. Something that implied she'd taken his side. Honestly, I think he's right. I think you were using him. I think what you did was really unfair. And I think he made the right decision by leaving. The words hit me like a slap. My own friend, the friend I'd confided in, the friend who'd heard my honest thoughts, was telling me I was wrong. Was validating his decision to leave. Was suggesting I deserved this. What? You're supposed to be on my side. Everyone has practice relationships. Everyone dates people who aren't the one. This is completely normal behavior. What's not normal is staying with someone for a year and a half while seeing them as practice. What's not normal is knowing you're going to leave eventually and just not mentioning it. What's not normal is calling someone practice while they think you're building something real. What's not normal is using someone to figure out what you want while they're genuinely invested in you. That's not normal, that's cruel. I wasn't being cruel. Yes, you were. Maybe not intentionally. Maybe you didn't set out to hurt him. But you knew he was temporary. You knew you didn't see a future. You knew you'd leave eventually when someone you deemed better came along. And you kept all of that to yourself. You let him invest emotionally and financially and time-wise in something you knew had an expiration date. You took everything you wanted from the relationship, companionship, affection, sex, someone to do things with, while giving him a relationship that was secretly doomed. That's not just unfair, that's using someone. Her words were harsh. Harsher than I expected from a friend. Harsher than I thought I deserved. But somewhere deep down, I knew she was right. If you knew he was temporary, you should have told him, she continued. You should have been upfront about not seeing a future. You should have given him the choice about whether he wanted to be in something temporary. You should have let him make an informed decision about his investment. But you didn't. You kept that information to yourself because you wanted to keep the benefits of having a boyfriend without the commitment of actually seeing him as permanent. That's selfish. That's using someone. And he had every right to leave the moment he found out. I didn't want to hurt his feelings by telling him. You didn't want to hurt his feelings, or you didn't want to lose what you were getting from the relationship. Because if you really cared about his feelings, you would have been honest. You would have told him, hey, I'm not sure I see a long-term future here, but I'm enjoying what we have now, and I'd like to continue if you're okay with that being the extent of it. That would have been caring about his feelings. That would have been letting him choose. What you did was keep him in the dark so you could keep getting what you wanted. That's not protecting his feelings. That's protecting your convenience. But I did care about him. Then you should have respected him enough to be honest. You should have valued him enough to give him the truth. You should have cared about him enough to let him make informed decisions about his own life and his own investments. But you didn't do any of that. You kept him as your comfortable practice boyfriend while you waited for your real relationship to come along. And when he found out, he left. And honestly, good for him. He deserves someone who sees him as real, someone who values him, someone who doesn't classify him as practice. The conversation continued like this, her making points I couldn't argue with, me trying to defend myself and failing, her making me see that what I'd done was worse than I'd wanted to admit. That calling someone practice while they think you're real isn't just honesty, it's cruelty disguised as realism. Here's what I don't understand, she said after I'd been silent for a while. If you really saw him as just practice, why are you so upset he left? If he was just temporary anyway, if he was just a stepping stone, if you were planning to leave eventually, why does it bother you so much that he left first? Shouldn't you be fine with this? Shouldn't this be making your life easier since you didn't have to be the one to end it? And I didn't have an answer, because she was right. If I really saw him as temporary, if I really was planning to leave, if he really was just practice, then his leaving should have been convenient, should have saved me the trouble, should have been fine. But it wasn't fine. It was devastating, which meant maybe he wasn't really practice. Maybe I'd convinced myself he was temporary because that felt safer than admitting he might be real and risking getting hurt. Maybe I'd labeled him practice to protect myself from vulnerability. Maybe I'd been lying to myself as much as I'd been lying to him. Two weeks after he left, I saw his social media. He'd unblocked me, or maybe never blocked me, just hadn't been posting. But now there were new photos. Him with friends, him at concerts, him hiking, him living his life. And he looked fine, looked happy even. Looked like leaving me hadn't devastated him. Looked like he'd moved on easily. Looked like maybe I really was just practice for him too. Practice in learning when to walk away. One photo in particular broke me. Him with a woman I didn't recognize. At a dinner, both smiling, both looking comfortable with each other. Not necessarily romantic. The photo was careful to not be explicitly couple-like. But there was an intimacy to it, a closeness, a suggestion that maybe this was someone new, someone he was getting to know, someone who maybe wasn't practice. And I felt it, the jealousy, the loss, the realization that I'd had something real and thrown it away by calling it practice, that he'd been good to me and I'd classified him as temporary, that he'd invested in us and I'd decided he was a stepping stone. And now he was gone, really gone, moved on, practicing his life without me. I texted him one more time, desperate now, panicked, realizing what I'd lost. I was wrong. I shouldn't have called you practice. I didn't mean it. Can we talk? Can we try again? I miss you. He responded this time, just once, brief, clear, final. You meant it. You said it clearly. You classified me as temporary. I respect your assessment. I'm just no longer available to be your practice. I practiced walking away. Now I'm actually gone. I wish you well. Please don't contact me again. And that was it. That was the end. No closure. No long conversation. No chance to explain or apologize or convince him to reconsider. Just him practicing the boundary setting I should have practiced when I first realized he was temporary. Just him demonstrating the self-respect I'd failed to demonstrate. Just him walking away with dignity while I stayed behind with regret.